Hello, everybody. My name is Dylan Stiles, and you are joined us to the second episode of Queering the Air podcast. Today, we are queering the air with the amazing and fabulous Ricki Spencer, a trans Indigenous woman with a disability who is also the convener of the Queer Greens. Hello, Ricki.
Hi, Dylan, and thank you so much for having me.
No worries. I was very excited to be able to bring the diverse, political opinion to the podcast. And I just thought it was a natural fit when I've heard the great work of the Queer Greens, that we have your voice present in the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for having had an opportunity to kind of speak at a time when, with the looming elections, and where perhaps people are considering making their choice, especially those from our community who may be wanting to think, well, who will really represent us, within the next couple of years? And happy to share that journey with you and explore that in further details.
100%. I think you hit the nail on the head. This is a start of a series of podcasts, and we're really trying to bring in a lot of the different, party machines within politics to this podcast before the federal election, so we can see where do parties stack up when it comes to LGBTI representation, or queer representation is my preferred term. I also want to note that this podcast is being recorded on Bunurong land and Wurundjeri land, and I think that that's really important to always recognise that this land was stolen and was never ceded, and that we need to continue to fight for treaty and equality for our First Nations people at all times. I want to jump straight in, Ricki, and I would love you to introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about your story, your journey to being the proud queer person you are in politics today. Go ahead.
Well, okay, let's well, you know what? It really goes back a couple of decades. So I guess now I'm kind of placing my age, but it started back when I was doing my first degree at Deakin University. This is going back in the late 80s and early 90s, when the formation of the Greens Party took place. Now, that period of time, if you take your audiences back, was the period of time when there was very little visibility for, dare I say, LGBTIQ politics at that time. And I use that term then because queer at that stage of time was still, hasn't been kind of taken back by our community and used in like queer theory. So we were coming from a place of stigmatization. So if I was of that generation that grew up in fear of HIV AIDS. So for me, I grew up with before internet, before computers, but television. And television was my kind of lens to the world, as well as my readings through my first degree in sociology and psychology. But of course, psychology was still pathologizing us, and sociology was defining us as deviancy. So interesting enough, in that period of time, early 90s, my lifestyle, I was recalled, it was still seen as deviancy, which I didn't mind, but I thought, okay, if I'm seen as deviancy, where am I going to fit in? Where do I fit into the politics? And I've always been keen to be involved, but there was this fear of, well, do I fit in? And I do remember in that period of time when I was doing my time at Deakin, reaching out to different political arms, so to speak, to join, and wasn't welcomed. Labor Party wasn't interested in me. Liberal Party surely did not want a bar of me. So, it was like, well, where do I really fit in? Because I was sort of like this very feminine young, at that period of time, cisgendered male. Where am I going to fit in? So it ended up that the Queer Greens were developing. I think it would have been 92, 93. And I thought, this looks like something really interesting. But being early 20s, being very from marginalized background, I was very scared. And at that time, everybody who was probably at that seminal moment, the Bob Browns and all those wonderful people that we looked up to now as visionary leaders felt so old to me, because I was just, oh, I don't have anything wisdom. And isn't that sad that at that time, and I kind of sort of faded away, because I thought there was no such understanding of lived experience. It was like, well, I've got to keep learning more about theory. I've got to learn about Marxism, understand socialism, and that was the period of time when environmental politics wasn't again heard of. So that's sort of where it stemmed. And coming forward, you see, Dylan, I completing that degree, I then went on to do a social work degree, and that's where I really experienced a lot of marginalization, for people within my queer community, people living with HIV, and also people in the workplace, where I remember I had workers who refused to sit next to me and work alongside me, and I was told that I don't want that thing. So I wasn't even referred to as a person, I was referred to as a thing. That I don't want them next to me. And this was in Centrelink. I worked for Centrelink, the biggest employer perhaps at that time in Australia, in the 90s. And that just showed me that, and at that stage, my voice, I was angry inside, but I didn't feel I had a voice, and we were still passive, and all I had, but I remember I was proud of watching ACT UP, and I thought, I want to do something. I want to be there. And, my first taste of any work was working, of course, at that wonderful period of time, or I shouldn't say what, but that period of time of community activism, working with our community, in church halls, where we were meeting together to help people, in the end process, because that's what it was supporting people through that end process, as well as, the before HEX came in. So my first ever political march was in 1987, I think it was, or 88, marching against HEX. Needless to say, at that stage, it was pinnacle. But again, it didn't change the wave, and look what we are now today. So that's, sorry for going on, Dylan, but I just want to give you everyone that kind of understanding that it's something that I've lived with. And you see, growing up in the western suburbs, I was always used to being abused. And I remember a pinnacle time. I'll just quickly, sorry everyone to talking, but I want to share this moment because it really does highlight to where I am today. It was 1985, and I do remember I was at that stage when long hair was in fashion. Duran Duran, you probably don't know that, but it was a period of time that all these bands, and I had my hair, I was growing a bit long, and I was in a Catholic school. And it was the first time in my life where I actually felt good about myself. And I remember walking down from this train station, and some guy just came up to me and punched me for no reason. And I fell to the ground, and I was bleeding from my ear, and nobody stopped to help me. And I was so sad and angry. How could someone do that to me? Why did they hate me? And that was my first experience of violence, like pure, brutal, anonymous violence, because I was used to violence before in school. Because I grew up in that era, that. So I thought, I've got to do something. So I went to the police station. They laughed at me. They sent me home and said, maybe if you dressed more like a guy, you wouldn't have this happen to you. And they actually said, piss off, get out of here before we charge you with wasting our time and space. Wow. So, that was 85. So I thought I kept this all in. And I remembered being at home, always watching politics, and my family at that stage, who I thought were a family, but they were I was adopted, would always laugh at me and tell me off and chastise me and say, "Oh, who do you think you are, Bob Hawke?" Because I would see that, and obviously our people, marching and especially with Mardi Gras. So I thought, I've got to do something for change. And going forward, working in social work, I was always passionate. But then, I got into helping in micro servicing and support, but always in the back of my mind, there was that passion of social justice and wanting to have a voice. And I retrained as a teacher at VU. And I thought my life, okay, I'll just go into teaching because that's where change can happen. And that was okay for 2 years, sort of, because it's a very heteronormative space. But then when I being authentic, and we kept being told as teacher train, being trained that we have to be authentic, and it's all about, engagement with our students. But I found that there was very little queer, well, I would call queering of the curriculum. It was still very much heteronormative, or living through the lens of binary ways of seeing the world. And when I finally came out as transgender, and I had that word come out, but I guess I affirmed myself, I should say, I should correct myself. I found that the schools just kind of dropped off immediately. And then I thought, this is a problem. And then I remember applying for about over 50 positions. And the positions that I had stated I was trans, I didn't get a response. I just got thanks, but no thanks. But the ones that I did say I was trans, got to an interview, and that's blank faces and nothing. So I thought, I want to do something. So I thought, this is bullshit. So I went back to my master's in ed at Melbourne Uni, did diversity, same thing, did my work in that space in trans wellness with young people in schools. And again, I came out to the class, and these are to teachers and all sorts of school academics. And not one person out of the 80 students came up to me and said, "Oh, Ricki, great work. We'll help you if you ever want to look for work as a casual." Not one person reached out to me. So that fueled my anger. Not so much for me, but for generations. I thought, you hypocrites, you say you want justice in our schools, but when it comes to actual teaching staff, no, you want us to be binary, and you want us to be sit into boxes of maleness and femaleness because that's all you're comfortable. So going forward, that is where I fitted in with the Greens, because I went carefully again, looked at which groups, which political doctrines aligned with me. And I found that with the Greens, I could sit quite comfortably in their policy. Here I was, somebody from stolen generation with disabilities and queer, trans, Indigenous, and there was space for me.
I really thank you so much for sharing that. And I find it really interesting to hear everyone's journey, particularly queer people's journey into politics. And I think, things what you mentioned there, I reminisce, I went to my National Day of Action to talk about $100,000 degrees. So even generations on, we were talking about, the impacts to education. And I also went to Victoria University, and I did a Master's of Teaching there. And I found it really interesting as well, talking about, I guess, education being quite gendered as a profession. They even have, your Mr. Styles, your Miss Smith, or whatever. And I kind of raised with one of my schools, how does that work for someone who's non-gender conforming? And they were like, they couldn't give me an answer. And I'd spoken to a couple of other people, and I thank the Australian Education Union. They've got a great group chat of people who fall under the spectrum of non-gender conforming. And they use stuff like, I'm referred as teach. So they're kind of giving themselves a nickname of what their, I guess, pupils and students can use for them in a non-gendered specific language way. But then at my other school, they were fabulous. And they just said, well, everyone goes by their first name, so we'll just use your first name and we don't need to talk about gender. Or we'll use they, them pronouns if that is your preferred pronouns. And I think it's really interesting just naturally of how still some professions are so gendered in their approach, of which there's still so much more work to be done. Hopefully we're clearing the air about politics, but hopefully we're clearing the air about some of our professions and some of the experiences people are going through. And I guess also I just want to express my, sadness on the situation of where you were physically abused for being who you are. I think this is an affirming space on this podcast, and I think you're looking fabulous today. And I think that, still today we're seeing hate speech, we're still seeing forms of violence towards our LGBTI and queer community. And that is still got miles and miles to go. And I think, I said that it was a sign of the times that we were slowly moving to a better Australia, but I think it's gone pretty slow. That would be my kind of little seconds. Ricki, I think that so far you've been incredible, but I'm assuming you may have some mentors or some people you look up to within maybe the world of politics or personally of who kind of got you to where you are and why you were invested in politics and helped you on that journey to being the convener of
Wow.
Queer Greens.
Yeah, and look, that's going to be, you're going to be quite surprised, your listeners, because it's probably the person you least expect, and it would almost be the antithesis of who I am. But of all people, it was Germaine Greer, and it was somebody whom I had, closely admired in the 80s, 90s, and kind of formed my practice of feminist practice. However, it was her deliberate invalidation of transness and identity that really got me fueled and was part of my own affirmation and really segue into politics or being in a political space, because I thought, now here is somebody who has a privileged, white, privileged, educated person who is espousing division and indoctrination of heteronormity and disadvantage and stigmatization, which it doesn't make sense when her whole beginnings was all on reclaiming space and place for equality. And I listened, I think it was like 20 hours of podcasts that I went through going through, because it was like, I was thinking, what are you? It's like being in a relationship with somebody and then going back and listening and thinking, you lied to me, and I used the same. And what I did was, I've been influenced by a lot of writers, Butler and Foucault and others who've really talked about, reclaiming power. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to get you back for this, for what you've done to my community, Miss Greer. And I am going to now it is every space I can to make sure that we are visible. So it started at Melbourne University when I was doing my master's, and now doing further research where I'm the queer elected officer and proud trans woman who's always advocating for space for our community, but also within politics, Janet Rice. And Janet is somebody who I reached out to when I joined the Greens, and I thought, this is somebody who I've read through the politics. I thought I feel comfortable, and I felt so accepted. And it was a space that I was able to attend meetings and in the queer space. And at that stage, I think the convener was leaving, and I was pretty new at that space, and I thought, I want to give. And part of it, maybe it was selfish too, Dylan, because I hadn't been able to get teaching positions for a long time then. And I thought, I felt so invalidated, if that makes sense. I felt my identity was fractured. Here I am, spent all these years in education and teaching, and I'm unwanted. So it was a space that wanted me and accepted me, and allows me to connect people with the community. And it gave me an opportunity to kind of look at how policies are forming and everything. It was a party that listens. And yes, I'm probably biased to those that are listening, but if you think about it, how many political spaces can you go to where grassroots attendees get an opportunity to be part of the decision-making process up, and you have access to people who are in elected parliament to have your voice and opinion. So I kind of, I make sure that within our spaces, we talk about the importance of pronouns. We talk the importance about inclusive language and practice in workspaces. We hear stories about lived experience through Indigenous queer, people with disabilities who are queer, people coming into the country who are queer, about lived experiences and how the systems that we have that govern us are the same systems that weaponize ourselves in not having full access to all the resources.
I'm going to move on to the next question because I don't want to keep you for too long. So my next question, and I think you touched on it a bit in your introduction, but what are some of the barriers that you see, I guess, from your intersectional perspective? And I think I'm really interested in that perspective particularly, but the barriers for you entering into politics, and then what are ways that we can overcome those barriers, and maybe what is the Queer Greens doing to overcome those barriers across all levels of government? So we're looking at local, state, and federal as a sphere.
That's a really good question, because this is something that really is at the core of where we are at in terms of the politics, grassroots politicking within lobbying and spacing for representation. And the first and foremost is we don't have many people who identify as trans and gender diverse taking on those leadership platforms. And it is something to do with the fact of partly about exposure and being the media and, dare I say, opponents, you weaponizing that against us and derailing it from the issues at hand. And I had to think very carefully, because I was very interested to run, especially for on the ticket for the Black Greens. But I did not want the whole essence to be about, oh, there's that trans woman with a disability. And that was the focus. And I didn't want, not that I'm ashamed, not that I, because I'm proud of who I am, but I want to focus, dare I say, on the actual politics, the actual policies that are being proposed, and unpacking through critical lens the policies of the other political ideologies, and why the politics that we are trying to bring forward in this election, and for people to come on our side and vote for us to be part of that journey, that we are a truly inclusive party, not just only in voice, but in actual praxis. And this is the area that's one of the core areas of giving that. Until we can get media's spaces and moving politics away from attacking the person's gender, character, and really focusing on the person as a person who's able to critically examine and express opinions and back them up with research that can be validated and fact checked, then that's how it should be. Not should be on, oh, what's this person wearing? Oh, geez, they don't look very good today, and then that's sort of what we face, and mocking us for that, almost that level. So that's where we kind of sit, and it's difficult for some of us to take that next step.
I think you're bang on there. I think quite often we, I guess, as the queer community, the first thing is whenever you run as a candidate for anywhere, your queerness becomes front and center, instead of, hey, well, I have a social work degree, I have a master's of teaching, I have, this experience, I know how this kind of politics works. We don't hear about our policy. It immediately goes, oh, well, Ricki is wearing this dress today. Or, oh, Ricki's decided to wear pants today. What does that mean? And I think it's those dialogues, which immediately become a barrier.
Or they think that all I talk about are trans issues. And that's just, that's not the case. I'm very passionate about housing and homelessness. I'm very passionate about, reducing fossil fuels. I'm very much in favor of education being decolonialized. There are so many aspects to every single person who attends the queer group that we are, and we meet every monthly to discuss these issues. We all are different people working, different people have lived experience who have a passion, a desire for change, for equitability, and having access to resources so we can make sure that everybody in the community has a fair opportunity. So it's not just that I'm arguing for queer spaces or trans and Black spaces. I want everybody in the community to have access to this. And it's through unpacking the ridiculous heteronormative and stigmatizing policies of that were proposed by the Liberal government and some of the minor parties with the bill, which I shall not name because I don't like to give it any validation. That just showed us how much divisive and misinformation, dare I say, and disinformation that gets kind of into the vernacular of messaging that we really need to kind of disrupt.
And I also think in the prior kind of conversation, I think one of the things you said was around resourcing. I think if you resource your candidates and you resource people to be able to build their platforms through, you know, things like the queer Greens, accessible Greens, or, you know, the relevant alternates in other parties, I think you then naturally do see those people wanting to step up and take on that role. And I think you've really summarized, you know, those kind of groups in particular can really provide that platform for good candidates to stand. And I think that those platforms...
And Dylan, sorry, I do talk a lot. I want to show to everyone that's listening, you know, and I always believe in you know, speaking from experience and getting people to test out theories. And I would say to listeners listening to podcasts, test my ideas out. Go and contact these so-called other parties and get them for a conversation on Facebook, which are managed by social media content people. Tell them, you know, identify yourself in terms of saying, hi, I'm a queer person. I have a partner with a disability. What can your party offer somebody like myself or my partner in terms of our representation? What are your policies on healthcare, health affordability? And see if you get a genuine, honest answer, because I can tell you, you don't. Because I did reach out to the Labor Party in my electorate, which is out in the Footscray Maribyrnong area. No response. And, you know, and I didn't identify myself, so I couldn't say that, oh, it's Ricki Spencer. It was just, you know, and that just shows me that, you know, we don't matter. You know, it's almost like lives, certain queer lives don't matter in terms when it comes to political power in voicing. So you've got to look for it yourself. Look for a party if you're deciding who is going to take you on that journey, who is going to hear your voice and really want to build an inclusive, genuine society where you and our community have access to resources around them.
I think you're really bang on that. I think also everyone's journeys will be very unique and different, and some people will get what they need from a party. I'm sure there is members of Liberal Pride who feel very affirmed in their grouping. I know there's people in Rainbow Labour who feel affirmed in their grouping, and I think it's the same with the queer Greens. And I think you're right. I think if that is something that someone is deeply passionate about, they should reach out, connect, work out where their home is, I guess their political home. And we all know that everyone's experiences will be different and their journeys to however they enter politics. But I think you and I can both agree more queer people in politics is always a good thing.
And you know, and why do we have to have this division? Because wouldn't it be such a powerful voicing if people from the Labor Rainbow Greens got together and the queer Greens got together and the Liberal Greens and all their minor parties got together as a united front of people to say, you know what, it's time that laws had changed. It's time that we have better representation in schools, in healthcare, in laws, in reducing incarceration rates. Where would be such a powerful political force of voices for change? But it's when you kind of everyone goes into their own political kind of grouping that we kind of become fractured, because we're only as powerful as within the group that reinforces us. And we talk about building allyship, in schools and that. And I would say let's build allyship in politics, where we can work cross political lines to ensure that we can get, good policy through. So dare I say, in your podcast, I'm suggesting that, yes, let's reach out, because I would love to reach out to other queer political agencies and share, a commonality of things that need to change. We will all do it differently in our own parties with different kind of preferences, but the number one thing is just having our voice heard and really moving on beyond from 1978.
And I think evident of when that has happened was the marriage equality campaign. That was every queer person and their dog and their allies all coming out and pushing. And I think that was, every party which had some kind of queer activist in there, they were pushing for that. And I think the bill that shall not be named, we saw people cross the floor. And I think that was a real reflection of people were like, we need to make a stance and work, across parties to try and block a bill which could really hurt people. So I think we're seeing it, but I think there's more to be done. There's always going to be more to be done, and we need to get there. So hopefully this podcast provides the starting of that platform where they can start reconnecting. Ricki, I'm going to keep you only for a little bit longer. My next question, and give me a punchy response. What advice would you give to someone who is queer and they are entering into politics?
And look, for me, it's like, go with your heart. And, if something you believe that has to be done, go with it. And find others who are like-minded. And if one person doesn't hear your message, find another person that will hear your message, because there's always going to be someone that will perhaps listen to you. And don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Yes, you're going to get people who may try and stop you, or might have ulterior motives for not wanting you to speak, but you have the right to voice your view. Your lived experience is real, it's authentic. And if you believe that something has to change, or you want to affirm a particular issue that is important to you, whether it's environment, whether it be looking after pets, whether it's housing affordability, go with that, work towards it, find like-minded platforms, write, and if writing isn't your forte, then, use social media, use imagery, use photography. Every way can tell a story. Every image, every form, digital form can create a visibility to express an idea, and you will find an audience and go on to the issue. So for me, it was getting passionate on local issues. I think it was 2 years ago for Maribyrnong when we were looking at having representation on council. So find your platform, stick to your platform, and remember, when you're going into politics, you will find that there are perhaps you can be sidelined or sidetracked with individual issues, because people sometimes bring that into that energy. But always remember, channel that energy back into the issue. What am I here for? I am here because I want A and B to change. And if I want A and B to change, I need to get as many people as I can listening to what I say, and hopefully coming on board and support me on A and B. They might not necessarily like me as a person. They may not necessarily end up being my friend, and if that happens, that's fabulous. But you will get A and B through, and you have made a change. And as I always say, create a footprint so that you have something to say, hey, I was part of that journey. Where it be, or back in, if I was in 1988, I marched to propose that we don't introduce HEX. So you can always be part of some movement something locally that means something to you. And if it means something to you, it probably means something to somebody else.
100%. I love it. Create your footprint. I think that's going to get used as a bit of a promo tag for your podcast. I think it's a fabulous, fabulous line. Create your footprint and that know your voice and use your voice. I think, they are two big things, which I think if I was a queer person entering into politics, they're probably things I'd like to hear. And I think first step is into politics, you're starting to create that footprint. Maybe a small one, but it will just get bigger and bigger. And Ricki, my fun question, and I'm going to ask everyone about this, and I'm a little bit into pop culture. So my question is, who is your favorite queer character in a TV show or movie, and why? Big question.
Yeah, it really is. And I had no idea you were going to throw that to me. Look, I have to say, this is probably, again, giving a bit of my age. I was always a fan of Will and Grace. And for me, I would say it was Will, because he always believed in something. He was passionate, but he also lived within insecurities. And sometimes if we are honest to ourselves and use humor to get us through those dark days. And that to me really highlights it, because at the end of the day, the thing that counts is having friends, one or two friends, perhaps. It's okay to be neurotic and insecure, because that's what humanness is. And it's okay to be camp. It's okay to be however you want to be, and enjoy your life. We only have one life to live, and I say live it to the fullest. So, that was that one. But I'd like to throw another one to you, and that would be that I also like Divine. And the reason why I've liked Divine is that Divine, to me, and the films she made in the early 70s, this person did not give a shit how she felt. She was out there, she was political, and she was using the power of language and imagery to position ourselves out there in cinema in a period of time when we weren't even allowed to be into cinema. So if anyone got a chance and you Google Divine and you go back to early 70s and watch Pink Flamingos and all those real now iconic queer cinema, take from that sometimes think of your own uniqueness, and your uniqueness will be your ticket to your voice being heard.
Ricki, I did say that I'd only keep you for a short time. So I want to thank you. You have been an absolute incredible person to have on our podcast. And I think your experiences, A, they're valid. B, I think they are important. And I think your voice in the movement is important. And I think hopefully every voice that we bring on to this podcast, I will be able to say the same thing. But yours in particular, thank you so much. And thank you for being so generous with your time. Everyone, that is a wrap for episode 2 of Queer in the Air podcast. Our podcast is on all your favorite podcast channels: YouTube, Stitcher, Podbeam, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those good things. Please make sure you give it a like, give it a rate, drop a comment. And please follow our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok now. So please join us, and thank you so much, Ricki, once again. We will all see you next fortnight. Bye, everyone.